Good evening. Hola. Just to let everybody know, this evening, the meeting is being recorded. We do have it recorded. It'll be available on the internet as well. And then we also do have an interpreter here this evening. If you would like a headset for interpretation services, everything will be translated. So is there anybody who would like a headset?
Hay alguien que solo habla español que quisiera tener.
Okay. We'll let her pass those out to anybody who would like a listening device. Excellent. Okay. Let me check his working. Technology, man. Look how small it is.
You can't help me, you got on the wrong ear.
Aquí es cuando pide dinero y no.
Yo necesito estar hablando para que me escuche, pero a lo mejor sí, sí.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, well, oh, yes, yes. Thank you, Lord. Well, good to see some new faces this evening. Welcome. Did want to first off thank our Church of Guadalupe for allowing us, being a gracious host, and allowing us to use this space tonight, this evening. So thank you very much. So our agenda for the evening, I know we're starting a little later here than 6, but we're estimated to go from 6 until 7:30. Really quickly, I'll cover the process, rules and goals of this evening. Our plan is to go through some of the mapping tools, the neighborhoods and communities of interest, and then some of the next steps. And I did just want to start off, I know the slide wasn't there, I think it was at the very beginning. But my name is Jonathan Royes. I'm with the City of Santa Paula in the City Manager's Office. I'm a Management Analyst and the Public Information Officer. And tonight we have with us Dr. Justin Levitt, Vice President with the National Demographics Corporation, here to make this presentation. Just some meeting reminders for this evening, some housekeeping. Restrooms, if you needed to go to the restroom, the ladies' restroom is out there through those doors. And then if you needed to go to the men's restroom, right there through those doors over there. Another piece we just wanted to let everybody know about tonight, this process is really about getting feedback and engagement from everybody in the community. And that's why we're having so many of these workshops throughout the districting process. But I did want to remind everybody, we have a small crowd tonight, so I don't think we'll have any issues. But please be respectful. There's going to be opportunities for public comment and to ask questions and give some feedback. Everybody's entitled to give their feedback, so please be respectful of others that are speaking and allow them the time to speak. I don't think we'll have any issues with timing. So So we'll continue to move forward. So a question that we frequently get asked at the city by residents all the time is, why are we going through this process? Currently right now, the system for elections is an at-large system where the 5 council members are elected in an at-large election similar to what we just had. On February 22nd, however, the city received a letter challenging the city's current election system and asserting that the city's at-large election system violates the California Voting Rights Act. And as the next bullet point suggests, while it's unclear if the city's current system runs afoul of that existing law, the cost of litigation to try and defend against that argument can be very costly. And as the city of Santa Paula, the city council members decided that it really wouldn't make sense to try and challenge that. There would be too many legal risks and financial burdens placed on the city to try and fight that. So, to protect the city from those risks, City Council decided to move forward, and that's why we're here this evening, to move forward into the districting process where we'll separate boundaries in the city to make different districts. So I'm going to pass it over now to our expert, Justin. Take it over.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to everyone who is here tonight. I'm with you. I'm not going to stand at this podium. It makes me feel a little bit like I'm talking down, and I don't want to be, because I want to make sure we have a chance to have a conversation tonight about making this change. And so what I'm going to be talking about tonight are a few things. The first thing is what kind of rules we have to follow. What's the process like in terms of making this change from at-large to district elections? Secondly, we're going to look at the demographics of the city. We're going to look at where the people are throughout the city, what our neighborhoods and communities look like, just from a numerical standpoint. But eventually we want to turn it up to you. We're going to talk about some of the ways you can get involved throughout the process, including drawing your own map, drawing your own community. Before we open it up for discussion about we have a little whiteboard here tonight. We'll use that later on to actually make sure we get a record of all the things that we talked about during this meeting. So, where do we want to start? I want to start with the factors that we have to consider. Sometimes we call them the redistricting criteria. And we divide the criteria up into basically 3 groups. This first group, on the left, federal laws, are rules that the federal courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, say we must follow. First and foremost is equal population. This is the one person, one vote requirement. We have to make sure that our council districts have more or less the same number of total residents. And what that means is we take the total population number from the census, divide that by 5, and we get our target population in each district. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. So for example, if we need to go over or under by a little bit in order to take into account anything else on this list, we can do that, up to a maximum difference of 10% between the largest and smallest districts. So think of it as almost equal in terms of total population. And in fact, a lower deviation, hitting that exact 0 deviation, doesn't necessarily make it a better map. Maybe a little bit of deviation, but it lets us go down on a major road, it lets us keep a community together. That is something that we want to do. Second is the Federal Voting Rights Act. And while the Supreme Court says that race or ethnicity cannot be the only factor that we consider, it cannot be the predominant factor in the creation of a district, protected class communities, groups that have historically faced discrimination or barriers to registration, voting, and obtaining ballot material in their language, have their rights protected under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And so we're going to look at this and how this affects our community. Now, what I'll say just in advance is just because something isn't necessarily a voting rights concern, doesn't mean it can't be part of our discussion of communities of interest. And we'll get into that as we look at the numbers. in the next couple slides. Now, that takes care of, no, let's go back. That takes care of federal law. Let's take a look at this middle column now. The middle column is what we call the California Fair Maps Act requirements. This is a 2019 law that really makes it so that we have to follow a set of priority rank rules when we draw districts. So, according to this, these are after federal requirements. We have to do the federal stuff first, but then we have to take into account these four issues in this order. Contiguity is first. Contiguity is the principle that all parts of the district must be connected if possible. That if possible is there because, and Santa Paula has one of these little pieces of the city aren't connected to the rest of the city, they do have to be put into a district. And they have to be put into the closest district possible. But otherwise, we must have, as the courts have said over the years, one exterior border that connects all parts of the district. Some people like to describe this, and it's not the legal requirement, but it's kind of a way to think about it. You must be able to walk or drive from one part of that district to every other part of the district without leaving the district. That's one way to think about it. And that way of thinking about it, connectedness, really gets into our second priority, the undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. The law defines this as socioeconomic or geographic areas that need to be kept together for the purpose of their effective and fair representation. That's the wording of the law. And so one of our conversations that we wanted to have tonight and part of the process is, first of all, what are the different neighborhoods and communities that exist throughout the city? And what sorts of issues and connected ties are these areas that must be kept together for the purpose of their fair and effective representation? And we're going to come back to that. So start thinking about what that means to you, the neighborhood you live in, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of this presentation. Third, easily identifiable boundaries, as the law states, so that voters have an understanding of the district they live in. Think about how much easier it is when you can simply say that the 5th district is east of Oak Street than it is if you go back and forth with one block on this side of Oak Street and one block on that side, the other side of Oak Street in separate districts. So to the extent we can follow major roads, especially roads that divide population areas and neighborhoods from each other, are used rather than jogging through the backsides of neighborhoods and maybe even through a neighborhood. Fourth, compactness is defined as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. So this is really aimed at hooks and fingers and odd sorts of lines that grab a particular area or block even and add it to a district that's not logically connected to. Now, these are ranked order. So if that hook is actually the community border, and we sometimes really do see this with canyons or other natural features, then we have to follow the community line first before we talk about compactness. We have to follow contiguity before we talk about community. This is can create some really weird situations where if if there's a strip that's not part of the city, it's unincorporated, you can't cross over the unincorporated area to unite places on both sides, even if that unincorporated area is only a few feet wide. Because contiguity is first on this list, and we have to take these into account in this rank order priority. Finally, the Fair Maps Act says that we cannot consider partisanship. They expand this to things such as the location of potential candidates or the partisan makeup of the different districts, the voting history, the partisanship. And to this point, you notice that our data sets try to avoid any discussion of partisanship to avoid potential conflicts with this 5th criterion. I'm going to get through the criteria and then I can take some questions. Third, I want to talk about this last column on the right, other traditional districting principles. So the law is very clear. First, we have to take into account federal and state requirements. But there are other factors that the courts have allowed to be considered. These are up to us as a community on how much we take these into account and whether we take them into account at all. So, for example, planned future growth. The courts have said that you can consider where growth is likely to occur over the next decade. Not exceeding that 10% difference I mentioned earlier for equal population, but within that 10% you can take into account this area is likely to grow more, so we're going to set the underpopulated. But that's a choice. We don't have to consider growth at all, and in fact most cities, at the end of the day, don't consider that criterion as a factor, unless we know that there's going to be a new development of 20,000 homes that are only going to be in one part of the district. And so the same is true of this other criteria, respecting voters' choices. That's the principle that the voters of the city have elected a council, and it should be up to the voters to decide whether or not the council continues or has a chance for re-election or not. This is something that we can consider if desired, but it's also something that can be ignored. And that's going to be part of our discussion as we go through the process. And it's very clear that these principles can only be considered after we talk about the federal requirements and the state requirements that we must comply with. So before we look at the numbers, I think we had a quick question. If I can...
Real quick, I see we have a question, so I'm going to let Justin answer that. But real quickly, I saw we had a few more people join us. I wanted to make sure, did anyone need a translation or interpretation services? We do have that available for free this evening. Miguel, do you want to maybe say it in Spanish? We have...
Si alguien necesita interpretación de español, que por favor, si lo tenemos disponible, si quieren usar.
Sí. Okay, we have another one up here.
No, she has it.
Oh, she does, okay. Anyone else? You good? Okay.
And I will make sure to repeat all the questions for our recording tonight.
Two questions. One, could you please explain
Could you please take your mask off? Or, thank you.
Could you please explain? Can you please explain a little bit further a real-life example of respecting voters' choices, continuity in office? What does that mean? And then another question. One of the rationales for having the community design maps is because we've had past problems in the state and across the country with elected officials designing their own districts that actually benefit them to get elected and re-elected. So to avoid that kind of conflict, California has been at the forefront of these drawing district maps. So my question on that is, I have heard one elected official inquire about his own district, and I would like some clarification about that, because it was my understanding, could be wrong, that elected officials should not be designing their own districts.
Well, thank you for those questions. What I'll say is that I'll answer them together. They connect to each other very closely. An example of, just to take a step back, the courts have repeatedly said that it is legal for boards, councils, states even, to take incumbency into account as a criterion. And the Fair Maps Act doesn't prohibit it, it just says it must be considered after we take into account everything else. So we would be looking at a situation where we have two maps that we think do an equally good job, but one has maybe something odd or unusual to get a particular council member into a particular seat, and one map doesn't. And that would be something that you might consider at the end of the process when you're in that final selection stage, picking between two maps. In addition, one of the things that I want to just bring up here is having the criterion allows us to discuss that as part of the process. I recently worked with a jurisdiction that removed the incumbency criterion, and we got a map that had these little odd fingers that were aimed at drawing 4 of the 5 council members into a single seat. And the person who submitted that map actually said that. That was in their submission statement. But it couldn't be discussed publicly because that was not a criterion for consideration. Putting it in as a criterion, as we have here, allows us to have this conversation first and foremost about whether or not we want to consider it at all, and it may be that we don't. We haven't drawn any maps yet. We've gotten a couple of public maps submitted, and so we will see what that looks like when we do the analysis after tonight's meeting, when we move into the next stage of the process. And it very well may be, and I think under the Fair Maps Act, a lot of cities that were going through the redistricting ended up putting council members in the same district in order to comply with the criteria. So I know that I'm not saying, like, you know, yes, we are going to make sure each council member has a separate district, or the opposite, we're going to make sure that we don't consider it at all, because right now we haven't drawn anything. What we're doing right now is talking about this as a potential criterion, and if it's something that you don't want to consider when you draw your map, when you evaluate the maps, when you provide your feedback to the council on the maps, you don't have to discuss that. But the courts have said that you can, it is a valid criterion. And actually, a lot of interest groups, including the MALDEF Guide to Redistricting and the NAACP Guide to Redistricting, talk about the importance of bringing this up as part of the conversation to make sure that your line doesn't result in what happened in like 2011, where one of the Latino council member or Congress members ended up one street away from the district that they were previously in. They ended up on the south side of the street, or they lived on the south side of the street, and the new border was right on the north side of the street. And they ended up actually moving into the new district in order to run in it. And that's the kind of thing that, I don't know, we might want to just at least have a conversation about as we move through the process. So what this does is it allows us to have that conversation. And so that's why we're talking about it now. And when we get back in front of the council, we'll continue to decide whether or not this is something we want to consider.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah,
Is this about the criteria?
Regarding this.
Yeah, go ahead. I just want to remind everybody that we have several slides to go through, but absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it. No, go
Later
ahead.
on, again.
I don't need a mic. I can, as far as I'm concerned, there's one rule that you guys are forgetting up there, that's the rule of common sense. Because as I look at equal population, are you looking at every home in that district? Because right now we're having a lot of problems with people living in, multiple people living in one home. If you got a 3-bedroom, there's quite a few people. You say equal population, is that voters or is that someone else?
That's a great question. For equal population, we're actually using the 2020 census total population counts. As the Supreme Court has said, one person, one vote means everyone counts. Children count. Non-citizens count. Everybody counted as part of the 2020 census counts toward equal population. That's what we're balancing between the 5 districts. And in fact, what we're using is what we call the adjusted count. That's what that adjusted number is. Essentially, the state of California moves the prisoner population back to their last known addresses throughout the state, and that's the adjusted count that we are required by the state and the federal government to use as part of this process. So that 30,772, that's what the census found lived in the city, plus the adjustment from that prison readjustment. Divide that by 5, we're going to get our ideal population of just over 6,000. In fact, I think it's about 6,150 people per district.
That is my problem, that you're saying 6,150 people per district, but yet, how many voters of those 6,150 are actually U.S. citizens and can vote? There's going to be areas that are going to have way more voters than you can expect.
Well, okay, so just to make sure we get it on the camera, doesn't this mean that there'll be differences in the number of registered voters or even eligible voters? Absolutely. And the courts have acknowledged that. Texas brought a case up to the Supreme Court in 2017 asking about using registered voters instead of total population. And the Supreme Court said, no, when we said total population, we did mean everybody. Because here's the thing, especially when we look at the Voting Rights Act, and we're going to turn to that next, look at the citizen voting age population, we're going to see that the number of people, the percentage who are citizens, the percentage who are over 18, who could register to vote, who do register to vote, really varies. And the Voting Rights Act actually wants us to take that into account and make sure that we don't have districts that are just packed full of people, of Latinos in particular, who are not eligible to vote and thereby don't have the same representation on a person-by-person basis as areas that have a higher percentage of people who are eligible to vote. And so we are going to see differences. In fact, I think just about everywhere in the state, we see differences between districts in terms of the registered voters. Sometimes it's because we have a younger population in one area. Sometimes it's because we have a college, and a lot of college students register at home rather than at the university they attend. Sometimes it's because we have a large migrant population. We're with a city up in the Central Valley, where a lot of the farm workers in that city don't live there full time and are registered to vote in other counties even. And so this is something that the law requires us to consider. But for equal population, we do use this everyone standard. Every person counts. And we can see that kind of differences here. Not maybe as pronounced as in some places. I've seen a 40 percentage point difference between Latino total population and citizen voting age population in some places. But what we're looking at here, the total population count by race and ethnicity is from the census. Below that, the citizen voting age population is the population over 18 with U.S. citizenship. This is what the courts call the eligible voter population. And it's what we use when we look at the Voting Rights Act. And so what we see here is that there are some differences. Particularly, we see that the Latino population goes from 82 to 72%. That's because the Latino population is younger than the population as a whole, in addition to the fact that the Latinos are less likely to have U.S. citizenship than the population as a whole. And that needs to be taken into consideration. One of those districts that was overturned in Texas had a majority Latino population, but not an eligible voter population. And so what we want to make sure is that when we draw a voting rights protected seat, that it's of the eligible voter population. And so let's take a look at that on our next map. On the map here, the color scheme shows the percentage of Latino eligible voters. The areas that are in the pink and yellow are over 75 for the pink, over 65 for the yellow areas. The areas that are in the greens are between 25 and 30% Latino. And so we see here that Latinos are concentrated throughout all parts of the city, particularly the central neighborhoods. And so that's going to be something that we want to make sure to consider as we look through, as we evaluate the maps. we're going to be looking at it's not really just a mathematical question, how many majority Latino seats can you draw, but how many Latino community cores are there? I would guess that 4 or 5 of all of the maps, 4 or 5 areas in all the maps will be majority Latino, one way or another. So, for our voting rights purposes, we really want to focus on the community aspect. What makes differences between different parts of the city, and how does that translate from this map onto communities? And so thinking about communities, let's go to the next slide. The law says neighborhoods and communities of interest, 2 separate terms. And so I want to think about each one in turn. First, when we talk about neighborhoods, what I want us to imagine are the smallest building blocks of our city. It could be down to a single apartment complex or a single row of homes that were built around the same time or have similar, similar residents with the shared, bonds of that community. These are sort of our building blocks of our communities. So neighborhoods, I want us to think about these as being very specific, having very good and clear geographic bounds. Particular streets, particular property owners. Maybe it's a historic district. Maybe it's a specific plan area. Maybe it's a particular mobile home community or a particular farm worker community. But think of these as the smallest units that we have in our city. And we want to make sure that all of our neighborhoods are kept together, these really small areas, that it would be a crime to break them up. In fact, it would literally be a crime to break them up. Because these, for purposes of fair and effective representation, these are people who need to be kept together. Neighborhoods then, and this is why I like my Lego analogy here, if you'll stay with me for a second, will build into our communities. So we can think of communities of interest as our shared issues, our shared problems, our shared concerns. And why I do this kind of difference between neighborhoods and communities is because our neighborhoods can build into different communities for different purposes. Maybe for one purpose, all of the different neighborhoods along a particular street come together on a traffic issue, on a road construction issue, or a new development issue. Maybe all of our communities or neighborhoods that attend a particular elementary school are a different way of building into communities. I'm just going to pause here. I know we have a couple people coming in, so I'm going to pull this train of thought a little bit. Just to kind of refresh, neighborhoods are like the smallest building blocks of our district. Communities are how they connect to each other in different ways, around shared issues, around shared problems, shared concerns, shared identity, shared history. And one of the challenges of communities of interest is that neighborhoods can come together in communities of interest in different ways. And so when we do a school district that covers the same area as a city, the communities may be slightly different than for a city. Because in a school district, we might be talking about the attendance areas and the bus routes and the issues of dealing with the county or the different other agencies involved with the city. So we want to think specifically about how our communities build up around city issues. Which could be that history of development and the cultural patterns and the lifestyle patterns. But for example, if we go to the next slide, it might also be things like zoning and planning. Which areas are more impacted by future development? Which ones are dealing with the redevelopment of a park or a particular, or of a redevelopment project around downtown? Maybe, let's go to the next slide. A specific plan area that's as small as the businesses and homes along a particular block, kind of one of our neighborhoods, or maybe one of our communities built from different neighborhoods. An example of one kind of community are attendance areas. And they may be more or less relevant for a city than they are for the school district. Certainly we've had cities where we say, yes, keep this particular elementary school attendance area together because we have a very cohesive community identity around it. And so, just as we kind of think about communities of interest here, what is the story of your particular community? Or if you're drawing a map of the 5 different communities that we are trying to put together. And if a community is big enough that maybe it makes up more than one district, what's the best way to make sure that it's divided in a fair and effective way? We have a very large community that makes up maybe 1.5 districts worth of population. How do we make sure to divide that community fairly between those 2 districts? Now, part of the story of communities of interest, we'll go to the next slide, is looking at some of the demographics. And what I've got to say is the demographics cannot tell the whole story. Demographics are only part of the story of what a community is. First and foremost, a community is your lived experience of being in that community and having issues, shared concerns, shared problems around a particular area. But we can use this to kind of look at where we see patterns. For example, here we're looking at renters on the left and where we see apartment complexes on the right. And this comes from the American Community Survey. So these are kind of larger units, maybe of 5,000 people, and we're just showing the overall percentages here. It's not saying everywhere, say in pink on the left, in the central part of the city, they're all rented as renters, but the majority, at least, of people who live in central Santa Paula are renters. And it's less likely to rent as you go farther north or south of the city. Similarly, we see that, with apartments, where are we more likely to see multifamily housing? In the central part of the city, we see more single-family homes as we go north and south. And this is just raw percentages, so we can't say anything about a particular building. Because even the extremes are, up to 25% of the buildings could be single-family homes or apartments in the extreme colors on these maps. We go to the next slide. Here we put up income and education. On the left, we have the percentage of households earning $75,000 or more. On the right, we have high school graduates, the percentage of people who have a high school diploma. And we see, again, a lot of these patterns may be very similar. For example, the apartments map looks very similar to the income map. Where we see more apartments, we also see fewer people earning over $75,000. If we go to the next slide, we also can look at people who speak Spanish at home. And on the right, we have households with a child at home. And what we see is very extremes on the child issue. People who live in the south central part of the city are very much more likely to have children at home. In fact, there are some tracts in the central part of the city where 75% of households have someone under 18 living in them. In contrast, on the west and eastern areas of the city, under 25% of households have a child at home. And this could be for as diverse reasons as it's a retirement community or a community made up mostly of retirees. To maybe it's one thing that actually shows up on this map could be colleges and universities, but also a very low percentage of people under the age of 18 living in those areas. But again, these can't tell the whole story, but they do help us understand the communities that we eventually get to. And so this is really, go to the next slide, where we want to turn to get your help. Now I'm going to start by outlining some of the tools we have available, and then we're going to open it up for discussion on communities of interest. So I want us to flip over to the website for a second, because we have put together a really good website, a really comprehensive website with a lot of resources on it. One of those resources that we do have here tonight is a one-page draw map tool. What we've done is we've taken the city, divided it into areas. These are our divisions. We've tried to follow major roads and group blocks together based on logical divisions. You can use this or you can ignore them. You can use this to draw a full map, and we definitely have seen people in the meetings get out a calculator and start adding things together to come up with a district number. Or you could just color in your community, your neighborhood on this map. Now, whatever we receive, and this is true of however you submit your feedback or comments, is going to be part of the record for this process. So it's not going to disappear, it's not going to go into some black hole and never be seen again. It will be presented as part of the record that we take to council at our next council meeting. They'll get a copy of every map submission, both in its raw form as submitted, and if you submit a whole map, we will process it. We'll give you the numbers, we'll give you a demographic spreadsheet with all of the different numbers for all the measures we've shown district by district. And we do that with every map submission we receive. So I want to make sure it's very clear that we don't ignore anything. We don't say, oh, that doesn't look good to us, so we're just going to throw it away. No, we're going to make sure that council gets a copy of everything.
Just to let everybody know, there are copies of the map in both English and Spanish on the table at the back. So either right now or before you leave, you can take a copy of the map. It's also accessible on the website.
Yes, so the maps are available on the website as well as in the back here tonight. So don't feel like you have to get this done tonight, because we still have plenty of time for you to submit maps before our next council meeting. Now, I do want to just also say here, if you don't want to submit a whole map, you don't have to. We are willing to take comments in any form, written comments by email or in writing, telephone comments, if you want to fax us comments, I think we used to even put a fax number on here. But we'll take the comments however you want to give it to us. In fact, what a lot of people do is color in the map, then write something on it or in the back or whatever, take a picture of it on their phone, and then just email that picture to the email address on the map itself. And I would say that's actually how we get the majority of these maps these days. In addition, our website does also have interactive review map. So all those demographics that I showed you, for income, for education, for race, we have an interactive review map that lets you turn on and off each of those layers and really zoom in and zoom out, search for addresses. It's an interactive tool like Google Maps. It doesn't let you make any changes right on those maps, but it lets you look at those demographics in more detail. You can even click on our areas in that map and see the actual numbers that we're using to get those percentages. Lastly, we do have a tool called Dave's Redistricting. Dave's Redistricting, or we call it DRA sometimes, this is where you can draw a map block by block. And so it lets you, you do have to create an account, and we give you a step-by-step guide on the website. We also have a quick video tutorial, 5 minutes, walks you through it. We also did demos of this at both the first hearing and at the Zoom meeting, which are available on the website. And it lets you go in block by block to draw your own map. For those of you who are really interested in getting into the details of showing where your community is, or wanting to draw all 5 communities, draw 5 districts, this tool is one of the best options for doing that. Now, we did get an email about this, so I want to make sure to bring this up. We do use census blocks. That's the one limitation of this whole process, is that because we're using census data, we are limited by census geography. Essentially, we have to make sure a map is equal population. Those equal population numbers come from the census, and so we're required to use that census geography for our process. That's a little technical for a lot of you, I know. But essentially what it means is we can't just put a line anywhere. The census has to have a line where we want to put it in order for us to do it. That might mean we have to make a choice. Does this area belong with the district to the north or the district to the south? Maybe the district to the east or the district to the west? Now, in a lot of cities, including, I know we've got an email about this, so I'm going to talk about it. Here in Santa Paula, we may not get block lines everywhere we want now. But every 10 years, as part of the census readjusts those block lines. So there'll be a chance, moving forward, to tell the census, this is where you should have put the line. And then in future years, we can use that line. If you want to know a really hard case, the city of Palm Springs has 94 different communities. Almost none of those 94 communities follow census block lines. And that is a nightmare because their first rule is don't split any of our 94 different neighborhood groups. And you're just like, well, I have to make a choice about which district to put this block in, and that's going to decide whether or not it goes in this neighborhood or that neighborhood. And hopefully, as we move forward, we will be able to get better block lines. And I know some cities have. Some cities have worked with the census over the years to improve their block boundaries. And so, you know, if we can't do it right now, it is something we can definitely look into moving toward the 2030 redistricting. Because that's one thing I want to say before I close. This is not the end of the process. Now, I think it's great. Getting in at the ground level, first time we're doing this, you're going to set the stage for everything that happens in 2030. But in 2030, there's going to be an opportunity to redraw the lines. In fact, if the population is more than 10% out of balance, you're going to have to redraw the lines. And so these lines we draw today are not permanent. In 10 years, actually in 9 years, we're going to take another look at those lines and adjust them to make sure that they still represent our neighborhoods, our communities, and follow all the new requirements that the state of California and the federal government will put onto our maps by that point. With that, I want to open it up for, first of all, questions. And then after questions, we'll open it up for communities of interest discussion. So, any questions about the criteria or the demographics?
There's a lot of questions.
Okay. So, while you think about that, let's go to the next slide. And we're going to ask you some questions. Because these questions are about getting you to start thinking about the communities of interest that you might want to take into consideration as you look through the process. For example, what are some meaningful places that are important to the community? A park, a library, a street corner, or a corner shop. Maybe it's a commercial bank, I know, a coffee shop, or in some place where you meet up, an elementary school or a high school. What are some common concerns? I know I threw some out earlier about development or traffic. We could think of a lot of different issues, environmental issues, pollution in a particular part of the city, or odors or smells. What are some cultural characteristics that bring a neighborhood or an area together? Maybe this could also be part of that meaningful place. Certainly, people who go to a particular church or synagogue or temple, people who are a particular cultural background, heritage. Or maybe it's work. What are some common areas where we have people who work at a particular field or job? And on that note, what about the physical environment? Do we have parts of the city that are more vulnerable to flooding, or more vulnerable to fire, or more vulnerable to potholes on the roads, or prowlers, whether it's natural or man-made? And finally, ultimately, what I want us to think about is that really question, for fair and effective representation, what needs to stay together? What neighborhoods, what are those smallest little buildings and community areas needs to be kept together in order for our map to be a success at the end of the day? If we don't get everything we wanted at the end of the day, what is one thing we absolutely need to make sure is kept whole? And on all of this, for our purposes, we want us to think about those geographic delimiters, or the roads, the canals, the fence lines, the property lines, whatever it is that helps to serve to divide and unite our communities. That's a little bit easier in a big city, where you might have a giant freeway that separates the two neighborhoods, or I live near San Diego, so we've got canyons that literally divide neighborhoods from each other. So what are some of the division lines here? And I think we're going to open it up here. We're going to be writing down everything here, so please be respectful, and we're asking everyone to just keep our first round of comments brief, so that everybody has a chance to speak.
First of all, you're creating 5 pit bulls. Because my community, my neighborhood is better than yours. And mine is better than yours. So you're creating 5 pit bulls. And under your federal law, you just said we want equal population. Under the state law, it says we want undivided neighborhoods. I don't see none of this as being very positive when it comes down to redistricting a city of 30,000 people, approximately 8 square miles. Leave this up to the big boys, the ones that have 150 to 300,000 people. But
thank you for that comment. Anybody else would like to?
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Amalia Ochoa. Yo soy una persona de tercera edad, retirada del campo, vivo en Carrillo, en Ronnie Fernández Campos. Mi prioridad mía.
Pues comprendo todo, pero escribió.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Amalia Ochoa. Yo vivo en Ronnie Fernández Gardens. Mi prioridad son los campesinos, porque soy una campesina retirada. Trabajé con más de como 40 años en el campo. Quiero preguntarles a ustedes con todo respeto quisiera que hubiera alguien que representara en Santa Paula a los campesinos, porque esta ciudad, Santa Paula, la mayoría somos gente latina y nuestros campesinos dan la comida para cada uno de nosotros en nuestras mesas. También estoy muy interesada en estas calles de por aquí donde estamos ahorita, porque ellos necesitan mucho que alguien los represente muy bien. Cuando yo estuve caminando, estuve mirando que hay muchas puertas con seguridad, y eso me preocupa a mí, porque no hay mucha policía, no hay mucha vigilancia. Ellos necesitan, porque hay jóvenes del futuro que deben estar seguros en nuestra Santa Paula. Hay muchas calles que veo yo que necesitan, especialmente los niños, las personas de tercera edad. Necesitamos vivienda, necesitamos mucha vivienda. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Hi everyone. What was just at the Paula Hernandez apartments, that's public housing right off of Dean Drive in Santa Barbara. There's a concentration of a lot of apartment buildings in that part of the city. If you go along Santa Barbara Street, and kind of there's this cluster that takes you all the way down to Palm. There's senior housing right along Main Street as well. I think that as a community of interest, clearly defined as, you know, this hub of renters and affordable housing that exists in our city. And so I think that really being a concentration, like a very clearly defined like renter district in our city.
Great, so let's make sure we get that senior communities of renters along Santa Barbara Street.
Going all the way down.
Going all the way down to Palm.
Towards Palm, yeah.
Yeah.
You. My name is Livia. Kind of going off of Amana's comment too, like I think the neighborhood around here is very defined by, like, for example, this church and also the Piedras Park. Also, I think, yeah, from walking around this neighborhood, from like 10th Street, Ojai, like this way, like it's very, like it's a very, it's a very defined community. And one of the characteristics that I've seen is like a lot of like roads that are not like fixed. And then yeah, like, it was mentioned like security, some like extra security.
And let's just make sure we get Piedras Park next to Church of Guadalupe. I want to make sure we get it on camera.
Oh, I can't.
Okay. Well, just for the record, if anybody wants to say something but is uncomfortable with the camera, writing as well.
Well, I just wanted to say that when I was a child, maybe 3 years old, we were all brought up in Oxford. The whole family was brought up in Oxford. I'm talking second cousins, first cousins, everybody. And when they closed the recreation department on C Street, that was a massive area of grass. And all the kids used to gather there and play. And little by little, nobody was together after that, when they took away that recreation center. Do you remember that? Lauren, you were too young, right? It was on C Street. It was the best. I mean, and then pretty soon you have the boys club, so some of the kids play basketball at the boys club. Some of them play on G Street because they opened out Court, the King's School and all that. So whatever we do, I would like to see focused a lot on a way of keeping the children and the youth of this community somewhat together, knowing each other and playing with each other, so that they can grow up all together and make fantastic human beings and fantastic citizens. Because that generation of kids, that's my brother's generation. And I mean, they have phenomenal skills to turn Oxford into a better city. And they were really loyal.
Let's also make sure we put that recreation center on 6th Street, or recreation opportunities in Central.
I would like to ensure that those residents of mobile home parks in our community have a strong voice through representation. And so we do have several mobile homes. Some are senior only, and then some are family parks. And they're spread out throughout the city, but I would like to also be conscious of the geographic barriers. So where we are standing right now at the Guadalupe Church, this is known as the Las Piedras Park neighborhood, and Ojai Road, a major highway, divides us to the west. And the Santa Paula Creek divides us to the east. So those are geographic barriers that need to be addressed. Also, in terms of income, north of this church is what's known as the Oaks, and it's predominantly white, higher income individuals, whereas in comparison to the Las Piedras Park, our Guadalupe neighborhood, they're agricultural, lower wage workers, and this this church is what grounds them, what bonds them. There are cultural events, religious events that bring the community together right here. So I would like those accommodated.
Thank you. And then just to clarify on this comment regarding the roads not fixed, is that in this particular area, or what was the area?
Yeah, I was talking about this area.
Okay.
Anybody else would like to make a comment?
I can share about the neighborhood that I live in. I live really close to the cemetery off of San Nicolas, and Santa Paula feels like a really defined, Santa Paula Street feels like a really defined boundary. All the neighborhoods on the north side of Santa Paula Street, they were all those homes were built in the same era. Walking through the neighborhoods, all the homes look really similar. And on the other side of Santa Paula Street, going towards Santa Barbara, it's a lot more condos and apartments. So I think that feels like a really clear boundary on that west end of town. And keeping kind of Santa Paula Street and going north, and I think like over Don Park and taking you all the way up to Peck Road and kind of up on the hills. I think that neighborhood feels like very contiguous. And kind of thinking around the city and the similar demographics, I think the Oaks matched up with the hillside of Santa Paula, I think makes a lot of sense being grouped together, especially with the new development that we have in the city, the Harvest. I think that being really similar socioeconomic households, and so to me, that kind of be my neighborhood. I think that those make a lot of sense to together.
Thank you. I didn't mean to rush you. I just want to make sure everybody gets a first chance.
I think the finding district that represents renters, such as Santa Barbara, West Santa Barbara Street, is a community that has a lot of apartments. Also, there's a farmers community. And Ventura Street, I think it's in the middle of like Harvard and Palm. And keeping those together along with Santa Ana, which is also farm workers, renters, and yeah, keeping those communities together.
And you raise a really good point. If there's a street that shouldn't be used as a dividing line, like Ventura Street, because similar, that's something also that we can use as part of our process. We can incorporate to the maps.
Just adding on to the harvest homes in that area, I would say it's important to also distinct it with the homes that are by the river. Those I would say are more lower income people who tend to need resources from any nearby church that could provide food there. So just clearly distincting between the harvest homes to what including that with the Oaks as compared to Las Vegas community, and including that with some houses there by Santa Paula Creek.
All right, so just making sure, one second, how we can get to you next. I just want to make sure everybody's had a chance to speak once, had their chance. And we're going to open it up now for people who want to get more, want to speak to something, add to something that said earlier. So kind of our second go around.
I mentioned earlier the statistic in the central part of the city where there are single mothers with children. And that's a really important distinction, because who will speak for the children? They cannot vote. They're not eligible to vote. So the fact that that area has a representative that is a leader amongst those particular single-parent households is very, very important.
Make sure you have on there just the neighborhoods with high percentage of families with children in home. Something along those lines. My voice is going, but I get what you're saying, and I remember the maps. And as you guys think about it, again, I don't want this conversation to end tonight. In fact, we will not end tonight. I know that we're still going to open it up later on, but I just want to make sure for those of you who are thinking about the other events I know going on tonight, our next meeting is on January 18th. That's our third public hearing. That's part of the regular council meeting. We also will have, January 18th is a community, no, sorry. pause. January 18th is a regular council meeting. On the 21st, we're going to do another community workshop where we're going to have all of the maps that were submitted for that third public hearing, and we're going to discuss the maps. If we get a lot of maps, we may try to group them, but we'll show every map. Now, on January 6th, what's that line up there? That's the deadline to submit a map. Now, that's really close to New Year's. So if you're not on the city's mailing list, you can sign up for the mailing list on the website. You can also take our neighborhood survey, where we can describe your communities of interest, perhaps in more detail, or again, for those of you who came tonight. Or if you have people who didn't show up, come tonight, they couldn't make it tonight. They can take our neighborhood survey at any point throughout the process. We can talk about the neighborhoods and communities like we have here tonight. Everything we receive as part of these surveys, again, will be part of our public record for those council and available for the community to see as well.
And I just did want to add, I think one of the easiest methods to do a lot of the drawing of the maps is if you take like the paper copy, as Justin suggested, and just snap a photo, and then just send it to that email address, and that'll make sure your submission is included. And if you share that also with family or friends in the community, let them know. That's probably the easiest way for them to draw out their maps, maybe during New Year's or something. And we'll make sure to take that feedback.
And I'll say we've already got a couple of community maps. People who have already sent it in, either using the paper maps or days redistricting. We hope to see more. Because we hope to present to the council and to the community as all the different varieties of options that are available, so that we have the best map amongst those maps that we're going to look at that night. Now, when are maps going to be available? I said the 6th is our deadline for receiving them. Maps have to be posted 7 days before the third council hearing, so no later than January 11th, maps will go live. What's that 5-day delay about? Well, as I said, we've already got 3 maps from the community. We're expecting more. Our job is going to be to process them. We're not changing anything. All we're doing is standardizing them, providing a template for all of the maps so that we can compare them side by side with the same color scheme, the same demographic sheets accompanying them. All of those maps will be posted on the 11th. So that's the day to go to the council's website, the Draw Santa Paula website. And you'll already see we have a draw map page up there. It's blank right now, but it's going to be posted. Maps will also be on the interactive review map. So if you want to see whether or not we've captured that community where we see more families with children, you'll be able to put those lines over that demographic area to be able to make sure that we've captured the correct community there. Our interactive review map, just a reminder, you can search for addresses as well. You can actually turn on 2 different maps to compare and see where they differ. And it's a great visual way of looking at and comparing the maps. We're going to probably be using it in the meetings too, to look at the different maps as well. This is where they're going to go once they are ready, the draft maps tab on this page. And if you forget the date, on our schedule tab we have all of these dates, and we've been updating this continually through the process, and we'll continue to.
Excellent.
So, any other comments about communities and neighborhoods, or questions about the process, or we have one here?
There's someone else wants to go first.
You're the first to raise your hand, so we'll start with you.
All right, this will be my last meeting around communities of interest. I think in Santa Paula, like a historic district makes a lot of sense. You know, the high school, our downtown, the library. There's a lot of like original homes, and I think if you know Santa Paula, you know like where a lot of those historic places are in the city. I think the high school, the library, our downtown makes a lot of sense to be grouped together.
I really want to address the process. And I'm going to go back to when you started why Santa Paula is in the position it's at regarding that letter. First of all, my name is Ray Frutos. I'm homegrown, and I've been here all my life except for Uncle Sam when he took me on vacation. I am in total agreement of Mrs. Girardi's letter to the Santa Paula Times dated October 28th. She too was a past council member, as well as Mrs. Laura Espinoza, the author of the letter that was sent to the city. Santa Paula is not large enough to have district voting. We are approximately 8+ square miles in size, with approximately 30,000 in population. Number of voting citizens, I don't know. What I do know is that Santa Paula does not have 30,000 voting citizens. The loss of 4 votes really makes me angry, especially when I know this is spearheaded by a Latino organization. Let me set this straight. The forefathers were interested in that everyone eligible to vote had the opportunity to do so, which is our democratic way of governing. There might be rules set by the state, but in our case, common sense should be the rule due to our city's size. I would probably be open to this if we were a large square mile city. But then again, if there are 5 persons that will govern a city, I should have the right to vote for 5, not just 1. I hate to say this, but as a hometown grown Latino, let me put the shoe on the other foot. I don't believe that Ms. Espinoza would appreciate an Anglo organization forcing her to lose her voting rights. Somehow, I really feel that I've seen these things happen in the past. Some groups want their finger in every part of the governing system. Just saying, as there are many out there that also see the writing on the wall as I do. Why would anyone in their right mind want to divide a city the size of Santa Paula, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Jose, San Diego, maybe, as they're big spread out cities, but not Santa Paula? Why are we trying so hard to make Santa Paula 5 communities within 1 city? Thank you.
I was just going to say, thank you for your comments. I did want to just offer up anybody else who wanted to make some comments. I did want to just make sure that we are, as we head into this part where we do questions and people give up and give commentary, just to please be respectful of everybody. As the gentleman mentioned, we are in a democracy. These are currently the laws of the land right now, as Dr. Levitt explained with us. So this is happening all across Southern California, this process, all across California right now. So it's not something that isn't happening in cities. It is something that's here right now, and we're in that process right now. So I appreciate your comments, sir. Thank you.
But you have that 3rd option.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak as someone who's also a lifelong resident of Santa Paula, and my family has lived here for a lot longer than I have too, and I'm personally really excited to be here and participate in the process, and it's really distracting with the name calling and criticizing the process, and a lot of us are just trying to participate and be active, and so I just want to call for that of participation and being open, and so that's what I'm here for, and I want to be part of a space like that. So as a resident, I want to localize that of I'm here to participate, and I want to be in a space that allows me to do that, and I I really appreciate the presentation that's been given, and the notes and the conversation. It's been really great. And I will say, there's also Oxnard, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Goleta, Santa Maria, Ojai, population of 7,000 who all also have district elections. So I think this is a very big conversation for us to be having in Santa Paula.
Happening statewide. It is something that many cities, counties, school districts, special districts have been going through. And Santa Paula is by no means the smallest. In fact, we've seen actually cities and towns with less than 10,000 people, including Ojai, but also elsewhere in the state, switch to district elections because of the California Voting Rights Act.
And our school district.
Plus many school districts as well.
Including in this city, the Santa Paula Unified School District.
Including the so the local school district, and it's how we, and so what I'll just say is, the council has made the decision to move to district elections, and we can have that conversation at the future, we can continue to have it, but it is a decision that has been made.
What benefits have you seen from this
So,
process?
it's a good question. I was actually at the School Boards Association yesterday, where they asked that same question, benefits and the drawbacks of this process. And the benefits of this process, well, there's a few of them. And the first one is that local representation, first of all, it lowers the barrier to entry for candidates who might want to run for council but don't want to run citywide because maybe they feel like they can't compete citywide, but could if it was just among their neighbors. And so we get people who run for council who would otherwise never have put their foot in the race. We also get people who are much closer to the community that they serve. Look, I grew up in a town of 10,000. Issaquah, Washington had 9,700 people when I grew up there. And there were invisible lines. It was a town as small as that. And we know, and I'm sure everybody here knows, there are invisible lines in the city as well. We've probably laid a lot of them out here. And getting people from your community, even if they live maybe a mile away, may not be necessarily from your community. And that's what we're trying to understand as part of this process. And the biggest benefit is that you have a direct point of contact now on the council. You have somebody who is your specific person who comes from your neighborhood, who is maybe someone who wouldn't even have been on the council if not for district elections, who can now be your point of contact. That also can be the biggest drawback. If you have a council member that says, I only care now about my neighborhood. And so it's important to consider the flip side of this too, that the council will continue to have a responsibility to the entire city, not just the neighborhood that they come from. And so that's the kind of give and take of district elections. Even in a community as small as this, that you're going to have somebody who is closer to you, physically, most likely, culturally, but also someone who is directly responsible only to that particular portion of the city in an electoral way. They're still financially, maybe even morally, spiritually obligated to the town as a whole. And so keeping that in mind is really the give and take of the transition to districts.
How long have they been doing this redistricting?
So, I'm not sure I understand the question.
How long has it been going on?
How long has the city been doing this?
No, the entire...
The California Voting Rights Act was passed in 2001. And we've really seen most of the transitions or changes within the last 10 years. The state has consistently changed the law over the last 20 years in order to first make it easier for cities to transition. There used to be, for example, a voting requirement where you had to put it up to a vote of the city in order to make the change. The legislature got rid of that in 2016. There used to be a requirement that the charter cities were exempt. The legislature got rid of that, So the legislature has modified the California Voting Rights Act many times over the last 20 years. But the thrust of the law, the intent of the law, has remained consistent throughout the last 20 years.
Do you mind sharing more about your role in this process? I was at one of the previous meetings where there was someone else.
Sure. So that's a good question. And for those of you who have been to a previous meeting, my colleague, or former colleague, Daniel, took a job with a geographic survey company. They do engineering and all of that. He was working with us for the redistricting in 2021, and he basically found a job in a different industry after our redistricting ended. My name
from the same
We are from both National Demographics. I've been working on redistricting in one way or another for 25 years, since I was an undergrad in college. And I've been specifically working with National Demographics for about 20 years now.
So just to be clear, you'll be with us until April.
I will be with you for the rest of this process. And Daniel definitely got me up to speed on what had happened. For those of you who go back and watch, I've been on the Zoom, I was on the Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I've been working with both Pepe Smith, who's our outreach firm, and with the city now for the last month or so. And I hope to bring this process up successfully.
I just want to acknowledge you because I've been at every single meeting, and you have done the best explanation of I'm sorry, even your colleague. You've been a little more animated and enthused. You've got good response from the audience, which we haven't always had, pros and cons. So, big applause for you. Thank you.
And I have to turn it back to you. Having a whole whiteboard full of comments and things will make this process go a lot smoother when we start looking at where do we actually put those lines. How do we actually translate this into a map? So as we move to the next stage, just keep in mind, you're not going to like every map. In fact, you may not find a perfect map among that first round of maps, even with all the community maps we get. Maps will change as we go through the process. They'll evolve as we continue to have conversations like this, where we say, actually, no, I think you missed the line. It should be a street over. It should be a couple of streets down. Or that community is just too big. We need to be able to find a way to break it up. And so my role in this process is to be the facilitator for that. To be able to, it's not to pick the map. I don't pick the map. Ultimately the council picks the map with help from the community. But what I do is I can look at the comments and make sure how they translate into the different maps. I will propose, we will propose consultant drawn maps. They're not the best maps. They're designed to illustrate things that people have put in writing, but not submitted their own map. So if somebody said something tonight that we don't see on any of the maps, our job is to create a map that tries to do that. And it may not be the map that works. In fact, we often say the process goes best when they pick a community map, not one that's produced by a consultant. But our job is to help demonstrate what is feasible, what's possible. Maybe something that nobody has drawn that we think or we see in the data that maybe that would be interesting to look at. Maybe we want to reject that map ultimately, but we need to know why. We need to know what's wrong with it. And so one of my promises to you is that, we are the facilitator. We're not the gatekeeper. We're not the person who's the barrier between your comments and the council. We're there to get your comments to the council, to get your maps in front of the council. And so that's my promise to you.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to strongly encourage everyone, this is a great turnout tonight. Please go back and share with your friends and family and let them know the more maps, the better. How many maps do we have turned in?
So right now we have 3.
3.
After the first one of these, we got 3 in the next week or so. And then it's been a little bit dry since then. So we're hoping to see another batch come in.
Feedback from the community. All that information is going to be compiled together and given to councils to help them make their decision.
So is the council seeing these maps as they dribble in, or are they going to see it 1B.
So does the council see the maps as they come in, or will they see them all together? The answer is they're going to see them all together. And the reason for that is if we get lots of copies of the same map, for example, maybe because there's sometimes there's a community group and they all submit the same map. We want to make sure to say, this is the map, and we got it 125 times. Not produce 125 versions of the same map. So sometimes it's actually happened in one city. 2 people who didn't know each other submitted the identical map, an identical map. And that's part of our job, is to look at those 2 maps and say, hey, they're the same. And so we just show it once. We put a number on it, like map 1, map 2, something like that. And so both of them can go up and speak to the map. And they can say, hey, we don't know each other, but we separately came to the exact same idea. Which is really great when that happens.
The last question in the evening.
¿Cómo quisiera que uno de estos mapas estuviera dividido con Walmart o Target para no tener que manejar tan lejos que la comunidad de Santa Paula lo tuviéramos esas tiendas? Gracias.
So, and I can let the city talk to this too. We are certainly working on making sure they're available in public facilities. There's a little bit more of a challenge, I know, with private business. But certainly in public facilities, community centers, the libraries, we will try, we are working to make sure that these maps are available in those places.
That just reminded me, like the area around Boss. I think that's like very, that is a good part of the neighborhood.
So, area around bonds is our last feedback for tonight, but I don't want this to be the end of the conversation. So if something pops into your mind, like, oh wait, we gotta do that, just grab a copy of the map.
Or email.
Before you forget, write it on the back of this and take a picture of it and send it in, or write it up later tonight and email it in. Or maybe some of you will do this. Actually start drawing it out and say, hey, what if I created a district? And I'll end with this. Don't feel like you need to submit a whole map. If you just want to submit your community, your neighborhood, or one district, 2 districts, you can do that. We'll still draw it in. We'll still make sure the council gets it. Because one time, and I'll just tell the story to close on. We had somebody who basically, she knew one neighborhood of the city, and she drew a district that everybody loved for that neighborhood. But she decided to draw the rest of the city just randomly. And we had a community group come out, and they're like, how dare you divide our city at this street? It's such a weird division line. And she was like, I just tried to equal population equal. What we ended up doing was taking her one district and putting it into another map that worked for the rest of the city. So sometimes these single district maps are even more valuable than a whole city map. Especially if you know your part well, and you don't know other parts of the city, or you don't maybe not too sure about where you should draw the line. Having a one district map is not a barrier. So please send us your materials as we go through the process.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. And then just another reminder as well, if questions after you leave come up, like you said, you can utilize the back of the map. That email up there, the districting@spcity.org, actually goes to a team, which includes the doctor, myself, and then other individuals from NDC. So feel free, if you have questions or things come up, email us. That'll be part of the record. We'll be able to help answer those questions, hopefully, for you. But you know what? Thank you so much. We really appreciate the turnout this evening. And again, like the doctor said, there's going to be additional opportunities to provide feedback here in upcoming weeks. So, happy holidays.